Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Wilderness Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rob Minturn. I've gotten a few questions about exercise and with pregnant mothers. So I wanted to do a podcast specifically on that to address some questions on that for everybody else that may have questions on it. So with that, there are two categories or two topics that I really want to touch on. The category of exercises that pregnant moms are good to do, and then exercise modifications once you are pregnant, what to do with the main lifts and the main movements as far as what exercises are appropriate, what category exercises are appropriate. So it's a pretty big category, and it's something that really shocks a lot of people when they find out how big the category is. But all exercise is appropriate for pregnant moms. All exercise is safe for moms to do as long as they have an uncomplicated pregnancy. If there's a complication with pregnancy, definitely consult with your OB/GYN and your physical therapist. Sometimes there's a low risk pregnancy, sometimes there's a high risk pregnancy. So you need to be mindful of that. Being that there's no really specific category of exercises for moms to do, I want to peel that back a little bit because there are multiple layers for that. Modifications are necessary. As you progress through the pregnancy, your baby bump is going to get bigger. You're going to need to modify your exercises. How much modification you'll have to do is widely dependent on the size of your baby bump, how much weight you gain, your current modification or your current fitness status going into pregnancy, and then your goals throughout pregnancy, what you're thinking as far as how often you'll be able to exercise. Another big thing is avoiding Valsalva and avoiding bearing down in your second trimester. In your first trimester would probably be a good time to start to be mindful of how you're breathing during your lifts, during your squats, deadlifts, hang cleans if you're doing any sort of powerlifting or Olympic lifting. But being mindful of your breath is definitely something that you want to consider going into your second trimester, and not necessarily bearing down like you're opening up a can of pickles. So that is something to consider with that. Some facts here on runners. Most runners continue through the first trimester, about half continue through the second, and then about a third continue into the third trimester. So as the baby bump gets bigger and as the time comes closer, there's a significant reduction in the amount of women who are continuing to run through the pregnancy. Now, there could be a few reasons for that. Like I said, baby bump getting bigger. They may be getting busier, getting ready for the baby to come, especially if it's maybe their first. There's also myths out there that the jarring and the running can cause damage to the baby. That is not true. As long as you are at a no risk or low risk pregnancy, that is not the case. If you're at a moderate or high risk pregnancy, again, check with your OB. And if your OB is not necessarily a fitness forward OB or someone who believes in exercise, their opinion might not be one that you want to stop with. Not saying that their opinion is bad. Their opinion is definitely valid based off of their experience and their expertise and their skill level. You may want to consider getting another opinion from another OB just to see if their opinion is the same or if they have a different opinion as far as exercise goes. There's nothing wrong with getting another opinion. I tell patients all the time, look, if I'm not the therapist for you, if I'm not the coach for you, you've got to find someone who is, and I will help you do that. Not everybody's style fits into how I coach. It's the same thing when you are shopping for a new roof, you're shopping for new countertops. You don't stop at the first bid. You get a few different bids, and you're going to go with the one who you feel is the right fit for the position. Same thing with your OB, same thing with your primary care, same thing with your orthopedic surgeon, your neurosurgeon, anything that you're doing. It's okay to get a second opinion if that first opinion does not answer your question. Many women who were running return to run within the first month. Not saying that that's always appropriate, but it does happen. Those who do continue to run do have less of an instance of postpartum depression than those who stopped. So if you're a runner, do not be afraid to continue running. If you're not a runner, the dopamine release while you're running that runner's high is definitely something that can help combat the postpartum depression. Another myth that's been out there, and I touch on this in the guide too, with a lot of the myths that are out there, the guides on my website. If you haven't checked that out yet, definitely check that out. But Exercise has not shown to increase risk of miscarriage. That is something that women are told all the time who continue to exercise at a low level or a very high level, that they're going to cause a miscarriage. There's no research supporting that at all. Diastasis recti, 100% of women have this by the end of the third trimester. All it is the widening of your abdominal musculature. As time goes on after you have your child, the tissues are going to shrink back to the size that they were before. Some women continue to have the coning and the doming. Some women don't struggle with that. The diastasis recti is thought to be the lumbar spine bulging disc of the abdomen. And by that, I mean, when most physical therapists see a bulging disc on an image, they don't get too jazzed up because we know that imaging does not correlate with symptoms 100% of the time. An image might look scary, but that does not necessarily mean that is what's causing your symptoms. Same thing with the coning and the doming with the diastasis recti. Just because you have that, it does not necessarily mean that anything is wrong. In fact, there's another therapist that I'm working with on my travel rotation now who had a mom come in. She's got some of the coning, the doming, and he ran through some abdominal bracing exercises, and she reached a point where she started to cone and dome. That's a good sign that you were reaching someone's fatigue point with their abdominal cavity, with their abdominal bracing. So if you're able to control it and you exhibit no coning or doming with proper bracing, then and then you start to exercise and you notice that you're reaching a point where your abdominals are saying, hey, this is like what you're doing is a little too much for me to brace right now. This is our tipping point. Again, it's not bad. Moving on, I wanted to touch on some exercise modifications because, again, there's not a whole lot out there on what is safe and unsafe for pregnant moms to do. But we've already touched on all exercise is safe. The movements that we're going to go through, I'm going to touch on the movement and then talk about a trigger for regression or trigger for modification, rather, and then some of the modifications that you can make. The first movement is the deadlift. Deadlifts are very safe to do. Deadlifts are very good to do. They help keep your low back and the entire posterior chain, the entire back half of your body strong. A trigger for modification, though, is the baby bump, your belly affecting the ability to maintain your low back stability. So if you're doing deadlifts, squatting, really anything, you hear everybody say you got to brace your core. Well, what the hell does that even mean? Bracing your core is not it's not bearing down like you're pushing something out of you, like you're pushing a baby out of you. It's not that. Bracing your core is taking your pelvis and tucking it underneath you gently and stacking your ribs on top of your pelvis. You're getting your spine into a neutral position. That's an ideal position to lift in. Sometimes it takes very lightweight and a major regression in some movements to learn how to do that and maintain that neutral pelvis as you're doing these movements. But once you get it, your weights and everything like that will go back up. But that would be a trigger for modification with a deadlift, is your inability to maintain that neutral spine. And then feeling of heaviness, leaking, any pelvic pain, that's another regret or sign for modification. So with the modifications, there's a few things that you can do. You can modify the height of the bar, the starting position of the bar with a deadlift. You can raise it up a little bit. You can also do a sumo deadlift. What that is your feet are in a wider stance, your toes are turned out, your knees are opened up and turned out, and that's opening up your hips. It's creating a wider space for the baby bump. You could also use a trap bar. So a trap bar is a bar that you stand within and the weights go on the sides. So you're not having to worry about a bar path at all. And then you would just modify the weight as well. Modifying the weight would be something where you might be feeling a heaviness, pelvic pain, or leaking, and you need to dial back the weight a little bit. Squats, all squats are good. It's good to continue to squat throughout your pregnancy, as long as your pregnancy allows that, your type of pregnancy allows that. A trigger for regression here is going to be your belly, again, affecting your ability to maintain that neutral spine, maintain that low back stability, and then feeling of heaviness, leaking, or pelvic pain again. Some modifications. So you're going to modify the height or the depth of the squat. So box squats are a nice way to modify that. And then you're also going to modify the weight. You could also modify the bar position. You can do back squats, front squats. Front squats are going to keep you a little more upright. You could also do goblet squats where you're holding the weight onto your chin, so you're not necessarily using a bar at all. You could also do rack carry squats where you have kettlebells or dumbbells on your shoulders and you're doing all that in a rack carry position. All right, bench press. A trigger for regression here is going to be pressure in your pelvic floor, heaviness in your pelvic floor, the typical 3 pelvic floor signs: the heaviness, the leaking, or the pelvic pain. Also, your inability to properly manage your pressure via not doing the Valsalva is going to be important here too. It's an upper body movement. You're really putting a lot of pressure on your arms, through your arms and your chest and your back. So being able to freely breathe and exhale as you're pushing up is going to be important for the pressure management system, so that way you're not bearing down. Also, positioning. So now you're on your back, and exercising on your back is okay, as long as you're not exhibiting any sort of cardiac or respiratory symptom, and you feel okay doing it. If you're experiencing other symptoms besides your cardiorespiratory system while you're on your back, modify it. Take the bench, sit up a little bit. Maybe instead of doing a bench press, you just do push-ups. So that way your face is towards the floor. With the push-up, you might have to modify if your belly size is too big to where you can be flat on the floor. You're later on in your pregnancy, and do an incline push-up where your belly's not going to hit the floor every single time that you go down into the push-up position. Okay. Some other modifications for the bench press would be dumbbell or kettlebells being used instead of the barbell. You do single arm presses. That's really going to work your abdomen, and it's going to demand a lot of stability out of your abdomen. Incline pressing, we talked about sitting the bench up and then modifying the weight a little bit if your pressure management with your breath is not able to be appropriately done. Olympic movements. So these are your cleans, your snatches, your push press, your push jerk. The bar path is going to be a major problem here as you get later on into your pregnancy. What you don't want to do is create poor motor programs with these movements because you have a baby bump. You don't want to start to bring that bar out and around your belly and then get it up to your shoulder, get it up above your head. The reason being is you're going to have to break those habits once you are no longer pregnant and your belly bump is no longer there. Some modifications would be to use a dumbbell or a kettlebell and then modify the bar path. Again, if you're coming from your hip, that's going to be, if you have to go out and around your belly, it's probably a sign that you just need to start using a kettlebell or a dumbbell for those snatches, the cleans, anything like that. Impact, running, and burpees. So trigger 4 modification here are going to be those 3 pelvic floor symptoms: the heaviness, the leaking, and the pelvic pain. And then your belly bump hitting the floor. You don't want to do that. Modifying, and that's mostly with the burpees and with the push-ups too, like I just briefly touched on. With the burpees, you can do incline burpees. You can also do burpees where you just step back into the plank position and you avoid jumping or hopping. You could also do a burpee to bench. You could do, instead of running, you could do rowing, ski ergometer, stationary bike, elliptical, other things where there's not as much impact if you're experiencing those pelvic floor symptoms. And then planks, touched on that a little bit ago too, but a trigger for modification would be any coning or doming with a diastasis recti, excessive low back sway with those front planks. Modification for that would be a Pallof press. You could do the carry positions, the farmer's carry, suitcase carry, rack carry, and the few other carry positions. And then we'll probably need to work on some neutral spine work and getting you strong and bracing within that neutral spine position. So with exercise modifications, I want to talk about, can exercise be taken too far? Research really isn't conclusive on whether or not exercise can be taken too far, just because there's not a ton of research on women who are pregnant. And when you start to get into that realm, there's not a lot of research on women who are pregnant that are exercising at very high intensity. I know for a fact that some women have exercised up until pretty much the day they've done CrossFit, up until pretty much the day that they gave birth. Obviously, they were modifying everything, which is totally fine. Like, you're still doing what you love to do. You're still getting that group exercise setting. You're still exercising and taking care of yourself. You're just modifying everything, which is totally appropriate. We do know that working at greater than 90% of your max heart rate reserve or your VO2 max does present fetal bradycardia and a noticeable decline in uterine blood flow. So bradycardia is where the heart rate slows down. So the baby's heart rate will slow down if you start to exercise at higher than your 90% VO2 max. So if you keep your exercise mild to moderate, you're going to be fairly safe with all of that. Another study did compare women exercising vigorously versus not vigorously. They showed that there was no difference in fetal birth weight. There were no adverse effects, and the women who exercised vigorously were pregnant for 0.2 weeks longer. So that research study really showed that there was not a huge change in mom or baby with exercising at a very rigorous rate. But again, there's not a ton of research out there on it yet. So just be mindful of that and consult your OB. So your clinical takeaways: we need to stop scaring moms who are going through non-complicated pregnancies. You guys are fine to exercise. You guys are fine to exercise throughout most, if not all, of your pregnancy. Definitely consult your OB if you have any concerns, and get a physical therapist on your side who is familiar with exercising with pregnant mothers and comfortable with the exercise modifications. You taking care of yourself is number one. Sleeping, your nutrition, and your exercise. Take time for yourself. It is okay to do. If someone gives you shit for it, or someone says that you really shouldn't be exercising because you're pregnant because you're going to hurt your baby, they more than likely do not know the research that is behind the reason why you are continuing to exercise. You can only control so much. Enjoy the journey through the pregnancy and your postpartum process. Your body is going through a huge, giant, astronomical change with growing another human inside of you for hopefully 9 months. That is going to be a lot of change induced on your musculoskeletal system, your cardiovascular system, your nervous system, your hormones. There's just a lot of stuff going on with that. So be gracious, be kind to yourself, push yourself, but know that your body is going through a ton of changes. So you need to be patient with your body and just enjoy the process. Maintain your fitness throughout the pregnancy to set yourself up for a good postpartum recovery. Like I touched on earlier, the runners who continued to run during the postpartum process showed less struggle with postpartum depression. You want to set yourself up to be successful. You want to set yourself up to progress through that postpartum phase as best you can. So that way you're not having to struggle with that for a month or for 3, 6, 9 months, a year, 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years. Set yourself up for success by continuing to maintain your fitness throughout your entire pregnancy. The last clinical takeaway: if you are new to exercise and you want to start exercising during your pregnancy where you've never exercised before, perfect. You're okay to do that. You definitely need to consult your OB to make sure that you are safe to exercise. And then you definitely need to get a physical therapist who, again, is very familiar with working with pregnant women to get you on an exercise program that is safe and appropriate and will progress you as you progress through the pregnancy. Hey, thank you for tuning in to the Wilderness Fitness Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please head over to your podcast app and consider leaving a review. If you think a friend or a family member may benefit from listening to this podcast, please consider sharing this episode with them. We appreciate your help in the growth of this podcast. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for even more content, and the weekly Hump Day Q&A, where you can get all of your human performance, rehab, women's health, and injury prevention questions answered. If you're interested in getting hooked up with even more content from Wilderness PT from the comfort of your own home, head over to wildernessphysicaltherapy.com and get signed up for the Spike Camp membership. This is where you'll have access to prior seminars and a workout that'll have you in shape each fall, designed by yours truly. Since you're there, check out the mid-month media newsletter that goes out 1 to 2 times a month, which includes a variety of topics with the most recent research on health and human performance. You can sign up by hovering over the free resources section and subscribe to any of the free guides, or simply sign up under the mid-month media newsletter tab.